Gittin Daf Yomi GITTIN, ownership of Israel, Mishum Yishuv Eretz Israel Lo Gazru. The whole relationship, or the whole approach to how we gain ownership of Eretz Israel is part of the political polarization that's taking place in Israel today. And there are two fundamental approaches. The one is through conquest, as we've seen throughout history in the original mitzvah of Kibush Haaretz, and the other is through acquisition. So there have been many times in history, including our own, where although we had conquered the land, or reconquered the land, there were non-Jewish inhabitants who owned large tracts of land. And what do we do about that? We've already done the conquest, but they have the ownership. So that has to be an approach of negotiation and purchasing and acquisition. So there is a unilateral method of conquest, and there's a collaborative method of acquisition. And when does one use the one and when does one use the other is part of what we need to look at. And in understanding this, the mitzvah of populating Israel, that's populating it, not conquering it. There's a difference between conquering Eretz Israel, kibush Eretz Israel, and yishuv Eretz Israel. Conquering the land and occupying the land, populating the land. And the piece of Gemara in Daf Yomi Aleph and Chesed Beis talks a lot about what actually constitutes Israel, and particularly it talks in our sugya about an area called Syria. Syria is actually partially where Syria is. There's an area there called Aram Tzova, which is talked about in the Tanakh already. David HaMelech is involved with them and conquers that area of Syria. Aram Tzova is where Aleppo is today. It's Chalaba. Chalaba used to be an amazing Makom Torah. There was some very great Gedolei Yisrael who came from Chalaba, which is, as I said, today is Aleppo. We have somebody who comes to shul on Shabbos afternoon. A man is there every Shabbos afternoon at KBA. He's from Aleppo. He's from Chalaba. That's where his family comes from. There are many people here in Israel and in the United States who are from Chalaba. And they're amazing people and an amazing tradition and history and background. We Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans get very focused on our own tradition and background, and sometimes we forget the richness of Besorah that there was in Morocco and in Algeria and in Tunisia. And Syria altogether is a very, very special Torah tradition that comes from Syria. And in some way there are some comparisons between the Syrian tradition and the Lithuanian tradition. And I even once read a study, which I haven't been able to find subsequently, that in some DNA testing, they found Lithuanian and Syrian DNA, Jewish DNA, are very similar. And both of them track back to very, very early times, which is interesting. In understanding this, there are a few psukim we need to learn. The first one is in Vayetchanan. Ki yeviacha Hashem Elokecha la'aretz asher ata v'shama l'rishta. When you come to Eretz Yisrael, which I've given you. V'nashal goyim rabim mipanecha. And there are lots of nations that will be, you'll chase out from before you. The Chiti, the Girgashi, the Emori, the Kanaani, the Prizi, the Chivi, and the Yevusi. Shiva goyim rabim v'atzumim mimcha. 7 nations who are bigger and greater than you. The idea that our power and strength has never been from counting the Gulgolet, from counting the skulls that constitute our army. It's been Su'ur Rosh, it's been the head, it's been the spirituality, the intellect of the Jewish people that has caused the conquest. And there have always been more enemies than Jews. The Jewish nation has always been small, and we've had to deal with a large number of antagonists, including in Eretz Israel itself. These nations are all idol worshippers, so there's a difference between idol worshippers and monotheists. Hashem will give them before you and you will smite them. Destroy them. If they're not willing to accept the 7 Noachide laws and become civilized, moral people, then destroy them. Lo tichrot lahem brit velo techanem. Don't make deals with them. Velo techanem. Chanem comes from chinam. It comes from chen. It's an interesting word, and the Gemara goes into it quite a lot. Rashi brings 2 views from the Gemara. Lo titen lahem chen asur lo la'adam lomar kama na'eh goizeh. That you can't compliment idolatry. If something is an idolatrous practice or an idolatrous person or an idolatrous structure, even if it's very beautiful, don't comment. What we admire says something about our value system. And to express admiration for something which is fundamentally corrupt, ideologically corrupt, religiously corrupt, morally corrupt, we're not allowed to do that. That's lo techanem. Davar acher, al titen lehem chanaya ba'aretz. Don't let them encamp in the land. Don't let them squat and settle in the land and take up land. Again, we're talking about idol worshippers. The din today with Arabs who are monotheists is different. And that comes from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Second posuk in Shmos, Parshas Bo, Vayom Arishon Mikra Kodesh, Vayom Hashvi Mikra Kodesh. We're talking about Pesach. Kol melacha lo ya'aseh v'im. You can't do any melacha on those days. That's the heter of ochel nefesh that we have for Yom Tov, that on Yom Tov you can do food-related melachas. You can cook on Yom Tov, but nothing else. But in so telling us, it says, Kol melacha lo ya'aseh v'im, in the nifal form, in the passive form. Which means, says Rashi, lo yaseh, not lo yaseh, not you're not allowed to do any work on Yom Tov and certainly on Shabbos. Lo yaseh, work may not be done for you, afilu al yedei acherim. Even non-Jews can't do work for you. That's one of the sources of the din that we have, that you can't ask a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbos. And then we've got in Yeshayahu the posuk of Mimtzo cheftecha v'daber davar, keep Shabbos and restrain yourself from doing your weekday things and talking weekday talk. Says the Mitzudus umeladaber bo davar hane'asar b'Shabbat kecheshbonoto chiyotze. Don't talk on Shabbos about things you can't do on Shabbos. There's an isur from Tanakh. You can't v'daber davar. You can't discuss on Shabbos things you can't do on Shabbos. So business and things like that you don't talk about on Shabbos. So those are sources in the Tanakh for amira legoy, for not asking a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbos. So now we come to our Gemara. Va'koneh sadeh b'Surya kekoneh b'farvarei Yerushalayim. There's a brisa that we have at the bottom of Daf Chesam with Aleph, that if you buy a field in Syria, this area which David conquered, so it was an area which wasn't part of the Mechemes Mitzvah, that Hashem didn't tell David to go and conquer it, and it wasn't quite the ideal time to go and conquer it. It's called the Kibush Yachid, as the Gemara talks about. It's an individual, the king. David HaMelech decided to go to war. It wasn't a decision of the Sanhedrin with the Urim V'Tumim. It was David's decision. And that's okay. It was Kibush Yachid. It was an individual's conquest, but it doesn't have the full dinim of Eretz Yisrael. Once conquered, that doesn't make that area of Syria completely like Eretz Yisrael. That makes it partially like Eretz Yisrael. But the Gemara says if you buy fields in Syria, it's as if you buy them in the suburbs of Yerushalayim. For what purpose? What does this mean? If you're buying a property in Syria, you can write the deed of sale even on Shabbos. It's as if you're buying property in Yerushalayim. Shabbos al Kedaitach, are you serious? You can write a deed document on Shabbos? It's a doraisa. How could that be? No, not you. You can tell a non-Jew to write. Shvus means an isur derabanan. When we've got an isur doraisa means something that is inherently and ideologically forbidden, if it's an isur. Isur doraisa, that means that the way the world is built and designed, Hashem doesn't want us doing that. The world is not built in such a way that we should be doing A, B, or C. A derabanan is the Rabbanan institute certain halachas taking into account human weakness and societal needs. To make the Torah practical, the Chachomim are given the responsibility of adapting the laws of the Torah to the realities of life in every generation. And that's what they do. That's the mitzvahs of the Rabbanan. The Torah, there's no adaptation. The Torah is how the halacha is. This is what Hashem said. This is the essence. The Doraisas are to understand the essence of the halacha. And the Rabbanan is to apply and adapt the Doraisa into the situations of society and of human reality. And on Shabbos, the Rabbanan on Shabbos is called a Shvus. There's a special name. The Shvus is a mitzvah derabanan, nisur derabanan on Shabbos. And here, Shvus, the Gemara here holds that to tell a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbos is a derabanan. It's not a doraisa. The Rishonim who hold it's a doraisa, but the Gemara here clearly holds to tell a goy to do something for you on Shabbos is a Shvus. Mishum yishuv Eretz Yisrael legozu rabbanan. The Rabbanan did not include cases of populating Eretz Yisrael in that Shvut. So they never forbade the Rabbanans if the result of doing the Rabbanan is populating Eretz Yisrael. That they didn't do. So Eretz Yisrael is different. Tosfos goes into the beautiful Tosfos here and says, Afagav damira lovid kichovim shvus mishum yishuv Eretz Yisrael legoz Rabbanan, aval mishum mitzvah acheret lo. That's specifically for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, not for any other mitzvah. Don't think whenever there's a mitzvah involved, you can tell the goy to do something for you. You can't do that. But other mitzvahs, you can't ask a goy to do a doraisa because you want to do a mitzvah. The shul is locked and the shul is dark and you need light in order to do Kriyas HaTorah. Ask the goy to turn on the lights. That's what you can't. You can't even ask a goy to bring a sefer that you need to learn on Shabbos through a Carmelis, one of the territories of Shabbos. It's specifically, it's only certain mitzvahs. The mitzvah of bris milah, which is the whole Gemara in Eruvin and in Shabbos, that by the mitzvah of bris milah, where the mitzvah of bris milah pushes Shabbos aside, you're allowed to do a bris milah on Shabbos. So there you can ask a goy to do work to make the bris milah possible. But in other mitzvahs, you can't ask a goy to do something which is an Issur D'Oraisa. And the Bahag, the Baal HaLuchos Gedolos, we've spoken about him often, one of the earliest halachic works that we use, written in the time of the Goinim, Da'afilu Issur D'Oraisa Shari Al David Kechovim L'Tzorich Milah. The Bahag says, even a D'Oraisa, if it's a Tzorich Milah, you can ask a goy to do. But that's Dafke Milah Du Shari Aval L'Tzorich Davar Acher Afilu Al David Kechovim. But says Tosfos, that's only bris milah. So this is not a blanket heter. There's a specific situation, a D'Oraisa, a D'Rabbanan, you can ask them to do where Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is involved, and by bris milah you can ask them to do. The Tosfos Reed says, asking a goy to do something is not a real ma'aseh. Yes, it's a shvus. To ask a goy to do something is forbidden midrabanan, but it's only speech. There's no action involved. The Rishonim come to the conclusion, which the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Siman Shin Vov, that you can ask a goy to do something if there are two conditions. The one is, it's a shvus d'shvutz, it's a double d'rabanan. You're asking them to do a d'rabanan, not a d'oraisa. And the second thing is that there's a need for it, a need for mitzvah, or there's somebody's in pain, or somebody's ill. That's when you can ask the goy to do that. The Shulchan Aruch wants to say, brings an Or Zarua, that here, writing these documents, they need to write the document not in Hebrew. Because the Or Zarua holds that on Shabbos, if you write in a foreign language, it's not an Issur D'Oraisa, it's only an Issur D'Rabbanan. Most of the Rishonim don't hold that way. The Vilna Gaon seems to go that way. And he says, so therefore, if you ask a goy to write the deed of sale in English or in Arabic, then you're asking him to do a d'Rabbanan. So that's a shvus d'shvus, a double shvus, a double d'Rabbanan, and it's b'makom mitzvah because you're populating Eretz Yisrael. But the Mishnah Berurah says most people don't hold that, we don't paskin that writing in English is any different from writing in Lashon HaKodesh. And therefore, that's you can't do that. But nevertheless, here says the Mishnah Berurah, you're allowed to do it by a goy mishum yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Siman Shin Zayin, the next Siman, that an Issur D'Oraisa you can't ask a goy to do even if it's l'tzorich mitzvah. Ze adifa, but Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is better. So we've got asking a goy to do a d'Rabbanan, which is allowed because it's a shvus d'shvus. You're only asking, you're not doing, and what he's doing is a d'Rabbanan. It's a double d'Rabbanan, double shvus. L'tzorich mitzvah, that's one situation. And Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, even if it's not a shvus d'shvus, you can ask them to do, because this mitzvah is different. Even a d'Oraisa. You can ask him to write a document, that's a d'Oraisa, but for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, for populating Eretz Yisrael, that's okay. So the simple way of learning it is populating Eretz Yisrael is such a big mitzvah that this is one exception the Chachamim made, and for nothing else can you do it, only for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. The Magen Avraham asks an interesting question. He has a difficulty. According to the Shitta of the Rambam, we won't go into it now, but the Magen Avraham has a difficulty with it. And in answering the Magen Avraham, I want to suggest to you an answer that is fascinating, which I haven't seen anywhere. So I'm inviting people who are learning, who experienced learners, to let me know, those who are listening online or any of you, if you find anything to support or to oppose this idea. And what I want to suggest to you is the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael in this situation by collaborative transaction, not by kibush. Kibush is to do it unilaterally. Purchase by sale, that's collaborative. How are you mekayim the mitzvah? So I'm sitting in Eretz Yisrael, and I want to, Rashi says that the mitzvah here is that mishum yishuv Eretz Yisrael legaresh of deikachavim b'leishev Yisrael ba, to remove idol worshippers from Eretz Yisrael and to populate it with Jewish people. So here there's an idol worshipper who owns a property in Yerushalayim. I want to buy it from him, to be mekayim this mitzvah. What's the ma'aseh? How do you do that mitzvah? What's the ma'aseh? What's the action of that mitzvah? He has to write a document. He has to hand it over. So the writer, when I ask him to write the document, I'm not asking him to do it for me. He's not my secretary. He's not doing it in the capacity of a secretary. I have to write a document, but at Shabbos, do you mind writing it for me? That's not what that's talking about. What that's talking about here is I want to buy this piece of property, which is the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. I can only buy it collaboratively with you. You have a part to do in that. You've got to write a document. Otherwise, I can't be Mekayim the mitzvah. So you're not writing the document for me. This is probably the only mitzvah I could think of, where the way you fulfill the mitzvah is by somebody else doing the action. You don't do anything. Yes, you pay for it, but even if you don't pay for it, if the guy writes the document and hands you the document, you've been Mekayim the mitzvah. So this mitzvah of occupying Eretz Yisrael, once it's been conquered, is a mitzvah that can only be done by somebody else doing the action. And he's not doing it on your behalf, he's doing it on his own behalf. He's writing the document because that's how you effect a sale. So that's something unique about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael that we don't have with any other mitzvah. And that's why when the Mishnah Berurah says, Filu l'tzorech mitzvah zeh adifa, this is different. And the Mogen Avrom says, Al kol panim ikeh k'tzat mitzvah b'kniyat batim, this is different. They all struggle with the fact that Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, we see in our Gemara, is different, but they don't explain what the difference is. What I'm suggesting is this is a very unique mitzvah. This is a mitzvah where it's not that you have to do an action and you're employing a non-Jew to do it on your behalf. You don't have to do any action. The way you fulfill this mitzvah is by the non-Jew doing what he has to do. And so when you're asking him to write the document, you're asking him simply to do what he has to do in order to effect a valid sale of his property, which results in you doing the mitzvah, and it's a completely different type of a mitzvah. And that might be why the reason that according to all the Rishonim, that one would think it shouldn't apply, you shouldn't be able to ask a non-Jew to write a document on Shabbos. In this case, it's allowed because the writing of the document is part of the mitzvah. It's the only way to do the mitzvah. He's not doing it on your behalf, he's doing it as the way the mitzvah is fulfilled. And as I said, I invite you to comment on that. And just to take the takeaway for us is to understand that there are some mitzvahs, particularly when it comes to occupying Eretz Yisrael. Part of it you can do by conquest, you can do unilaterally. But once you've conquered and there are non-Jews living here, you've got to collaborate. You've got to establish relationships with the non-Jews. You've got to be able to persuade them to release the property. You've got to be able to persuade them to sell the property. You've got to negotiate with them. You've got to deal with them. And that's the situation that we're in today. It's not just a high-handedness that you can come along. The kibush is done. Now you want to own Eretz Yisrael. You need a connection with people. There needs to be a level of trust that the non-Jew is willing to do his piece, which is to release, to sell, to write the documents, and to enable the Jew to become the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael.